No one who, like me, conjures up the most evil of those half-tamed demons that inhabit the human beast and seeks to wrestle with them can expect to come through the struggle unscathed.
Whoa, intense, right. And it kind of just throws you straight into today's topic here on the deep dive.
Yeah, absolutely. That quote really captures the intensity of Freud's work, doesn't it? This whole exploration of the darker parts of our minds that he really set out to do.
Exactly. And for everyone joining us now, we've put together a really deep dive into the mind of one of the most influential and, yeah, controversial figures in history, Sigmund Freud. We're going to dig into his writings, his letters, and also see what people who knew him or studied him had to say.
Yeah, today we've got this real mosaic of sources. We're looking at everything from personal letters, which kind of show more intimate side of Freud, to key excerpts from the major works that really built psychoanalysis.
And we're also looking at perspectives from his contemporaries, right?
Correct.
And later thinkers, too. Exactly. Just to get a really rounded view of his impact and, the debates and criticisms that have always surrounded him.
Okay, so our mission today, which maybe is your mission too, if you're listening, is really to get some clarity on Freud's ideas. Maybe you've always wondered where psychoanalysis came from, or you're trying to figure out why he left such a mark on modern thought. Or perhaps you just want to make sense of the ongoing debates around his theories.
Right. This deep dive is for you, basically. We want to give a solid overview, but, without drowning you in jargon or overwhelming detail.
So to kick things off, maybe it's a good idea to look at Freud's origins. Like, where did these ideas even start to form?
Its starting point. So Sigmund Freud, born May 6, 1856, he was an Austrian neurologist, psychiatrist, and of course became known as the founder of psychoanalysis.
A central figure, definitely. And wow, he was Anna Freud's father, grandfather to Clemens and Lucian Freud, and even uncle to Edward Bernays. That's quite a family tree impacting a lot of different fields.
Yeah, quite the lineage. And in terms of his own intellectual development, a few people were really key. There was Ernst Wilhelm von Bruck, who influenced Freud with ideas about psychodynamics, this idea of psychological forces driving behavior. He used this energy metaphor, like the mind has a certain amount of psychic energy that gets channeled in different ways.
Okay, like a finite resource sort of thing.
Kind of, yeah. Then there was Jean-Martin Charcot in Paris, who Freud studied with. Charcot introduced him to using hypnosis for treating hysteria.
Hypnosis. That was a huge deal back then, wasn't it?
Oh, definitely. And you absolutely can't forget Joseph Breuer and the famous case of Anna O. That partnership, that was really a turning point.
Right, the talking cure.
Totally. The observation that just talking about symptoms seemed to relieve them, well, that planted the seed for the whole psychoanalytic method. And that's really where Freud started formulating his core concepts.
Okay, let's break those down then. The foundations of psychoanalysis, starting with that bombshell idea, the unconscious.
Right, the unconscious. For Freud, it was like this vast hidden realm of the mind, full of buried desires, fears, repressed memories, basically, a part of ourselves we can't normally access. He famously said the interpretation of dreams was the royal road to the knowledge of the unconscious activities of the mind.
The royal road. What a powerful image. Like dreams are a direct shortcut.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
A way to understand what's really going on underneath the surface. And he proposed a structure for this, right? The topographical model.
Yeah, explain that a bit. Conscious, preconscious, unconscious.
So the conscious mind is everything we're aware of right now. Thoughts, perceptions. The preconscious is like short-term memory. Stuff you're not actively thinking about, but you could recall easily if you needed to.
Like remembering what you had for breakfast.
Exactly. And then there's the unconscious, proper, that deep well of repressed stuff, instinctual drives, things that influence us without us realizing it. Think of the preconscious like browser tabs you have open but aren't looking at. You can click back to them easily. The unconscious is more like hidden code running in the background.
Makes sense. And within that structure, he developed the famous theory of the id, ego, and superego. Could you give us the quick rundown on those?
Sure. So the id is the most basic instinctual part. It operates on the pleasure principle, wants immediate gratification, doesn't care about consequences. Think pure desire.
Like a toddler demanding candy now.
Kind of, yeah. Then the ego develops from the id. It operates on the reality principle. It's the part that tries to mediate between the id's desires, the constraints of the real world, and the demands of the superego.
So the ego's the negotiator, trying to keep the peace.
Exactly. And the superego, that's like the internalized voice of society, our parents, culture, the moral standards, the ideals. It's our conscience making us feel guilt, striving for perfection.
So id is impulse, superego is morality, and ego is stuck in the middle trying to manage it all.
Pretty much. Freud used this great analogy that the ego is like a rider on a powerful horse, the id. The rider has to try and steer the horse, often using the horse's own energy to do it, while also considering the path set by the superego.
That really paints a picture of our internal struggles. And Freud also talked about libido and these life and death instincts, eros and thanatos.
Yeah, the libido is the psychic energy that fuels the life instincts. Eros seeking pleasure, sex drive, self-preservation, creativity. Thanatos, on the other hand, represents the death instinct, aggression, self-destruction, a drive towards inertia. Freud saw these two fundamental forces constantly at play within the id.
And anxiety. Freud had a pretty specific take on where that comes from, if I remember correctly.
He did. He believed the act of birth itself was the first experience of anxiety, the sort of template for all later anxiety. That initial separation, the feeling of helplessness, he thought it left a deep imprint.
Wow. Okay, so Freud didn't just come up with these ideas. He explored them in his writing. What are some of the key works and the ideas he introduced?
Well, studies on hysteria, which he co-wrote with Breuer, is crucial. That's really the starting point for the psychoanalytic method. It introduced the idea that hysteria could be treated by talking about repressed experiences.
The talking cure again.
Exactly. Freud even said the goal was to transform hysterical misery into common unhappiness. A very pragmatic, therapeutic aim, you could say.
Ah, yeah, managing expectations. And then came the interpretation of dreams, which many consider his masterpiece.
Without a doubt, the interpretation of dreams was revolutionary. It argued that dreams weren't just random mental noise, but meaningful expressions of the unconscious. They carried symbols that could be decoded. He wrote that every dream reveals itself as a psychological structure full of significance. He saw dreams as this secret window.
And 3 essays on the theory of sexuality also caused a huge stir, right? Introducing ideas like infantile sexuality.
Absolutely. Freud challenged the notion that sexuality only began in adulthood. He argued it's present from infancy, manifesting differently through psychosexual stages. He also explored the complexity of drives, suggesting, for instance, that a sadist is also, on some level, a masochist, and he viewed bisexuality as inherent.
Then he started applying these ideas beyond the individual, looking at culture and religion in books like Totem and Taboo and The Future of an Illusion.
Yes. In Totem and Taboo, he used psychoanalytic concepts like the Oedipus complex to try and understand the origins of religion and social rules in tribal societies.
A bit speculative, maybe.
Oh, definitely controversial, even then. And in The Future of an Illusion, he argued religious beliefs are essentially illusions, born from our need for protection and meaning. He famously said the voice of the intellect is a soft one, but it does not rest until it has gained a hearing, suggesting reason would eventually prevail. He saw God as an exalted father figure and religion as a kind of collective neurosis.
And civilization and its discontents tackles that tension between our individual desires and the need to live in society. Feels very relevant today, doesn't it?
Totally. Freud analyzed the price we pay for civilization, that suppressing our basic instincts is necessary for social cohesion, but it also creates frustration and unhappiness. He observed how people often use false standards of measurement, valuing power or wealth over genuine fulfillment.
Yeah, that rings true.
He also reflected on how we're never so defenseless against suffering as when we love, and how religion can offer solace against life's hardships.
And of course, one of the most famous and maybe infamous concepts, the Oedipus complex. Quick explanation.
Sure. It describes a developmental stage, roughly ages 3 to 5, where a child unconsciously desires the parent of the opposite sex and feels rivalry towards the parent of the same sex. How this complex is resolved is seen as crucial for developing gender identity and future relationships.
Okay. Now, we have to address a part of Freud's work that's generated, well, a lot of controversy and criticism over the years. His views on women.
Yeah, this is a really sensitive area. Freud's theories on female sexuality, especially the concept of penis envy and the idea that female sexuality was somehow secondary or inferior to male sexuality. They've been heavily debated and frankly rejected by many, particularly feminists.
He even famously asked, what does a woman want? Apparently, after decades of research, he posed that to Marie Bonaparte, admitting he still couldn't fully answer it.
Right, and that question itself kind of highlights the limitations, and for many, the biases in his understanding of female experience. And there were other controversial ideas, like his suggestion about a mother reproaching her daughter for not having a proper penis.
Yeah, pretty problematic stuff.
Exactly. These ideas faced fierce criticism, arguing they just reflected the patriarchal assumptions of his time. And importantly, many female psychoanalysts like Melanie Klein and Karen Horney offered alternative perspectives, challenging and revising Freud's views to develop a more nuanced understanding of female psychology.
It's really important to acknowledge those critiques and how the field evolved. But let's go back to the method itself. How did psychoanalysis actually work? What was this talking cure?
So the talking cure is the foundation. Through techniques like free association, just saying whatever comes to mind without censoring and dream analysis, and analyzing the relationship between patient and analyst, the individual was encouraged to verbalize unconscious thoughts and feelings.
The idea being that bringing this repressed stuff into conscious awareness is key.
Precisely. Bringing those conflicts to light was believed to be essential for resolving internal struggles and healing neuroses.
And dream analysis played a central role, as we mentioned.
Yeah, the royal road, remember? Analyzing the symbols and narratives in dreams aimed to uncover their hidden or latent content, revealing unconscious wishes, fears, and conflicts. He described how every dream reveals itself as a physical structure carrying meaning.
And the concepts of transference and countertransference were important in the therapeutic relationship. Can you explain those quickly?
Sure. Transference is when the patient unconsciously redirects feelings and relationship patterns from important figures in their past onto the analyst. Countertransference is the analyst's unconscious emotional reaction to the patient. Understanding both dynamics was considered crucial for the analysis process.
And Freud also identified defense mechanisms, the ways our ego protects itself from anxiety. Can you give some examples?
Yeah, absolutely. There's repression, pushing unacceptable thoughts or desires out of awareness. Regression, reverting to more childlike behaviors. Projection, attributing your own unacceptable feelings to others.
Okay.
Denial, refusing to accept a painful reality. Displacement, shifting emotions onto a safer target. And sublimation, channeling unacceptable impulses into socially valued activities like art or work. These are things we all do, really, not just in therapy.
You're right. They're everyday psychological processes. So let's talk about Freud's legacy. It's undeniable his cultural and intellectual impact was massive.
Oh, absolutely enormous. Freud's influence stretches far beyond psychology into literature, art, philosophy, film, everyday language. Thinkers like Jean-Paul Sartre, Jacques Lacan, Herbert Marcuse, the Frankfurt School, they all engaged deeply with his ideas, whether agreeing or disagreeing.
Our whole vocabulary for talking about the mind, subconscious, repression, ego is steeped in Freudian thought.
Exactly. But as we've touched on, his theories have always been subject to significant debate and criticism.
Right. Questions about scientific validity, cultural biases, especially his views on women.
Definitely. Figures like Wilhelm Reif, feminists like Bettina Aptheker and Roxanne Dunbar-Ortiz, even later psychologists like John Kilstrom have offered strong critiques, pointing out limitations, lack of empirical evidence for some claims, and problematic aspects of his theories.
However, despite all the criticism, some core ideas still hold relevance, don't they?
I think so, yes. The fundamental idea that unconscious processes influence our behavior, the importance of early childhood experiences in shaping personality, the complexities of our inner lives and relationships, these remain vital areas of exploration in psychology and beyond. Even Einstein, while admiring Freud's genius, noted he sometimes had perhaps an exaggerated faith in his own ideas.
Yeah, the sheer fact we talk about the subconscious or things being Freudian slips shows his enduring cultural footprint.
It really does. And some of Freud's own reflections offer a glimpse into the man himself, complex, ambitious, aware of the challenges of his work.
Like his comment about his Jewish identity giving him intellectual independence.
Exactly. Or him wryly noting the progress of civilization from burning heretics in the Middle Ages to merely burning their books in his time. He even described himself as more of a conquistador or adventurer in the realm of the mind than a traditional scientist. He knew he was stirring things up, invoking those demons, as that opening quote suggested.
Okay, so as we wrap up this deep dive into Freud's world, what are the main takeaways you'd want someone listening to hold on to?
I think understanding Freud's model of the mind as this dynamic interplay of forces conscious, unconscious, id, ego, superego is key. Recognizing the weight he gave to early experiences, the power of unconscious desires, and the reality of defense mechanisms. It just helps make sense of why people, including ourselves, act the way we do.
Right. It gives you a framework, even if you don't buy into every detail.
Exactly. Even if his theories aren't universally accepted today, they fundamentally changed how we approach the human mind. Think about hitting the snooze button 5 times this morning. That's your id wanting immediate comfort. Your ego eventually dragged you out of bed knowing you had responsibilities, while maybe your superego was whispering about guilt for almost being late. It's a relatable, everyday example of those forces at play.
Huh. Okay, that makes it very concrete. And what about that one intriguing detail to leave people pondering after this conversation?
Maybe Freud's own observation that poets and philosophers before me discovered the unconscious. What I discovered was the scientific method by which the unconscious can be studied. It makes you think about the relationship between human intuition, art, philosophy, and science in our quest to understand ourselves.
Or maybe that famous, ambiguous line, sometimes a cigar is just a cigar. A reminder, perhaps, about the dangers of overinterpretation.
That's a good one, too. It speaks to the complexity of meaning and maybe a caution against seeing hidden symbols absolutely everywhere.
Great points to mull over. And if you listening have had your curiosity sparked, we definitely encourage you to dive deeper. Maybe read some Freud directly or explore the works of his critics and followers. There's a whole universe of thought out there.
Absolutely. Whether you ultimately agree with his conclusions or not, there's just no denying that Sigmund Freud profoundly shaped our understanding of the human mind. His ideas continue to provoke debate, inspire research, and influence how we think about ourselves and each other.
You know, maybe Freud was, as some critics have argued, a glorious mistake, but perhaps a mistake that forced us to confront the depths of our own humanity in ways we hadn't before. And with that thought, we reach the end of this deep dive. Thanks so much for joining us on this journey through the complex and endlessly fascinating mind of Sigmund Freud.
Guys, see you in another podcast. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel